Welcome to Lean Agile Management Podcast that helps you boost work efficiency, create culture of high performance, and build teams that thrive. Welcome to the lab. Today on the show.
If from your strategy you can't identify anything that you would say no to, it's probably not a good strategy. So it's not making commands and having control, it's giving commands and giving control about how to implement those commands. I've been talking about recently about, failure is not an option actually, because failure is a necessity. We actually have to fail. Strategy and aspirations are about being clear on an intent so that autonomy doesn't lead to chaos. So actually the tactical thing, or the thing that most people jump in first with, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it, should be the last thing. That's the last decision we should make.
Our special guest today is Karl Scotland. He's a strategy deployment expert, public speaker, professional Lean and Agile consultant for clients like BBC, Yahoo, Cisco, and others. He's a founding member of Limited Web Society and Lean Systems Society. Hi, Karl. Welcome on the show.
Hi, thanks very much for having me. Good to talk to you.
Well, I'm very glad you could find the time for us, and I'm happy to have you here today. So, in the modern, very fast-moving economy and world, it seems like the plans we come up with get outdated faster than they can even be implemented or even thought about implementing. So we keep hearing that people say strategy becomes quite a challenge. What kind of common issues and approaches with strategies do you see people are experiencing today?
Yeah, so I find that so absolutely things are moving fast, and I think that's one of the drivers behind Agile, Lean and Agile, is that we want to be more responsive. We want to be able to move fast. What I find though is that organizations are moving fast, but maybe they're just spinning their wheels. So what they're doing, all the product and the output that they're producing isn't actually aligned to any strategy. Either because the teams and the bits of the organization that are developing the software don't know what the strategy is, or sometimes the organization actually doesn't have a strategy, or not a clear strategy. So everybody's doing their best, but we're not really making any progress, and we're not actually having any business impact. So what I try to do is figure out what is the strategy. So if we can help organizations understand what their strategies are, and we can then start aligning the agile transformations and the work that agile teams are doing to that strategy, then we start to have a better chance, both that the organization is successful, but also that the teams can figure out what is the right thing to do. Because even with agile, I still go into organizations where agile is just something that teams are told to do. We're going to go agile. We're going to use this method. We're going to use this approach. Just do it. And you're going to get some small gains, but I don't think that's going to be successful in the long term.
Right. Yeah. And what kind of specific issues do you think people would have, apart from obviously not having any strategy? What kind of challenges do they face when they start thinking about, okay, we have this, let's say, disruption in the market, or we're clearly lagging behind, we need to do something. So what would be the typical roadblocks preventing people from getting to productive discussion?
So the first thing is being clear on what those challenges are. So where the disruptions are coming from, or what the opportunities that you can take are. So I refer a lot to a model by Richard Rummelt called the strategy kernel. A great book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And he says that the three core elements of strategy are the first is diagnosis. So actually we need to diagnose what the problems are. What are the things that are going to stop us being successful as an organization? That leads us to putting in some guiding policies about how we're going to address that. And then that allows us to take coherent action. So we need to have all three of those things in place. I think they're useful things to think about. What does it mean for us to be successful as an organization, not just as a team or a product development program, but for the organization to be successful? And what's our diagnosis of the current situation? So situational awareness, which can lead us to make some key choices. So the other useful model there is Roger Martin's playing to win. So he talks about where do you play and how you're going to win. So where are we going to play? How are we going to win this? That leads us to strategy. And then we can take coherent action. But I think the coherent action needs to be taken and decided by the people who are doing the work. So a lot of the time, the coherent action, if agile, implementing an agile approach is our coherent action, it comes as a top-down thing. Whereas really we want that to be a bottom-up thing. So strategy is defined by the leadership of an organization, and how we meet that strategy, how we implement that strategy is decided by the people at the coalface, the people that are doing the work, the people that are closest to the problem. So if we can get really strong alignment between those two things, then I think we can solve problems much more effectively and more quickly.
Right. Yeah. And this is the point that is familiar for people who are close or interested in Agile and Lean. But I guess this sounds really revolutionary and sometimes even dangerous to some people in more traditional management environment. But you said you made an interesting point about setting up what we actually want to achieve. So yes, we have these challenges, but defining success seems to be a crucial part of this as well. Mm-hmm. So could we expand a little bit on that? Are there some kind of frameworks or methods that we can use to help us identify the true goals? Because we'll get only what we measure, right?
Yeah. So I use a model that I call TASTE, TASTE. It's just a kind of hopefully a memorable acronym. So I start with the T is true north. So this is the lean concept of what direction are we going in as an organization, and everything that we do as an organization should take us towards our true north. So that's the first thing, is a really high level thing. And it is, I find people find it useful to think of it in terms of, vision or mission. So that kind of big, 10, 20 year goals of the organization are really, why was the organization created in the first place? What were those really big problems we were trying to solve? But that's long term. So in a shorter term, the A then is aspirations. So what are our aspirations as an organization? And I usually find that actually when you start digging, those people know what those are. If you're a public company, you've probably made some commitments to your shareholders, the market, about what you want to do in the year. And there's an economic model behind the organization. It's there. But usually it's hidden away, and only the CFO might really understand it. But
right.
Number of customers, number of sales, number of transactions, number of users, all those things are probably the economic indicators of whether the organization has been successful. And ultimately, when we get to the end of the year, we're usually saying about did we get the number of sales that we wanted? Did we reach our the number of new customers, or did we reduce the amount of customer churn that we're having? There's normally some big things there. So that's what I talk about aspirations. And those things I don't think we need any kind of new clever models to figure out what those are. Normally it's just, all it is making it transparent and clear that this is what we should all be working for. I prefer to talk about them aspirations rather than targets. Just as soon as we get into targets, then potentially we start driving bad behavior. And we want those aspirations to be ambitious. So it's okay if we don't meet our aspirations, maybe. Whereas targets, you tend to think of, if you don't meet your target, it's negative. But aspiration, like a size of the ambition that we have in an organization, and then we can then start talking about, well, what's going to stop us doing that? And that's when we get into that the diagnosis area, and the number of tools there. So one thing that I quite useful to get people thinking about this is the cognitive future backwards exercise, which is really getting people to think about what would an unreal utopian future look like, and what would an unreal dystopian future look like. So getting people to think out of the box, be really creative about what would the future look like if it was really good or really bad, and what are the things that might lead us to those futures. And that usually draws out some perspectives about the organization's past and the things that are going on now, and what people's different perspectives are on what the future might look like. And that often draws out. So I did this with an organization, and it turned out that there was some kind of clear architectural issues that the organization had that the CEO was completely unaware of. By getting a group of people in the room and running these exercises just to get stuff out and on the table, we can start deciding as to what we should do about it. That then becomes your guiding policy. So that's strategy. So True North, aspirations, strategies. I've kind of been thinking recently about strategies as the choices we make about how we want people to make choices. So it is a choice about, where we play, what we're going to do, how we're going to win, but it's not a detailed choice. It's what Rummel calls guiding policies. So they should guide us towards making decisions, but they're not the detailed decisions themselves, because we want the people closest to the problems to be making those decisions about what the right things to do are on a day-to-day basis. So they're the tactical things. And so once we've set the strategies, people can then make tactical decisions about what do we do in the really short term, the near term. What do we do today? What do we do tomorrow to implement that strategy in order to help us meet our aspirations? And then the last bit of the model is evidence. As we're implementing tactics, we're making these tactical decisions about what features we should build, what products we should build, what processes we should use, what technologies we should use, what practices we should use. All these kind of day-to-day decisions that we're making about how we work and what we work on. We want some evidence that the decisions we're making are good decisions, or evidence that we're making are not so good decisions. And if we can pick up that evidence and get fast feedback on that, then we can start amplifying the good decisions, dampening down the less successful decisions. And what we want to see is evidence that we are going to win, evidence that we're going to meet our aspirations. So True North, aspirations, strategy, tactics, evidence. That's the model that I use. And then there's a nice framework that I like to use called the X Matrix, which puts those models on a single A3 piece of paper that we can visualize all the different pieces of it. And I kind of use a metaphor of a jigsaw puzzle. We've got all these pieces of a puzzle. We start putting them onto this framework, and we can start correlating how they fit together. So we can then have conversations, and the conversations really is the key bit, about why we think certain strategies will contribute to certain, meeting certain aspirations, or why we think certain tactics will help implement certain strategies, why we think certain tactics will lead to generating certain types of evidence, etc. We can visualize that on a piece of paper and even populate this framework on a piece of paper in a workshop. We start getting alignment, and the alignment is the key. You mentioned earlier, people are concerned that if we give people autonomy, they're going to go off and chaos will happen. Actually, the model that comes from the Prussian army in the 19th century, so it's actually a military model, which is a really good one, is that we can have alignment and autonomy. So if we give people a real clear intent about what we're trying to achieve and how we want them to achieve that, they can decide what to do at the ground level. So strategy and aspirations are about being clear on an intent so that autonomy doesn't lead to chaos. We can give people the autonomy to make decisions on the understanding they understand the intent behind the decisions that they're making.
It's interesting that actually those military tactics are still used today. And some of the best examples of military units that we know, like SEALs in the United States, people might not know, but that's exactly how it works. They are trained to be the best they can be, but then they're not giving exactly specific ground level tactics. They're given large, and they have the autonomy to do that.
Yeah, so the military gets I think it's misunderstood within the software community, because we talk about military command and control as if it's a bad thing. Right. But my understanding is that you're giving commands in terms of giving intent, but you're also giving control. Mm-hmm. So it's not making commands and having control. It's giving commands and giving control about how to implement those commands. So yes, Stephen Bungay's book, The Art of Action, is a great kind of historical review of military history and about how the military solved this problem, 200 years ago. The other more recent book is David Marquet's book, Turn the Ship Around, which is about how he applied some of these principles to turn a failing nuclear submarine into one of the most successful nuclear submarines in the fleet.
Wow, that's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, two really good books, definitely.
But you also mentioned a very interesting and strong point about aligning all these different levels. So, as I get it, the X matrix would help us do that. But how exactly should somebody approach such a complex issue as aligning different levels of an organization? So, we mentioned some bits about transparency and delegating control, but how can all these things click together?
So there's some cadence involved. So this isn't a one-off. Create the X matrix, hand it off to people and make it happen. Populating an X matrix is usually the kind of the very first. It's the start of the journey. It creates the initial alignment and initial shared understanding, and you want a kind of diverse group of people involved in populating that X matrix. So all areas of the business and all levels of experience in the business, kind of senior to junior, and marketing to product development. And then once you've come up with those high level tactics, then the next level down, or the next step, is what's called back briefing. So this is another term that I've picked up from Bungay's book, Stephen Bungay's Art of Action. Effectively, you're giving a brief to a group of people to go off and invest their time in solving a problem in a certain way. So you've given them the intent. What you want them to do is brief back to you what they've heard. So what's their understanding of what they've been asked to do, what problem they're trying to solve, how what they're doing is helping the business, what their freedoms and constraints are, what they can do, what they can't do. So if they brief back that to you, we can start picking up early any misunderstandings. So I like, the metaphor of, we give people the challenge of crossing a river. So the intent is we need to get onto the other side, and that's what we ask people to do. They brief back, and their understanding of the problem may be that we need to get some tanks over the river, so that we can, get our troops into an advantageous position. So what we're going to do is bring in some kind of metalwork and engineers, and we're going to build a kind of a robust bridge. Actually, the intent is not to get tanks over there. The intent is just to get a couple of people over there with some food for the locals. So we've communicated the intent as building a bridge. Some of the kind of detail around that might have been lost. So if we just say build a bridge, people might go off and build this really robust, over-engineered bridge. Well, actually, all we want is a small rope bridge. So by getting people to brief back, we pick up on that slight lack of alignment, and we can correct it quickly. And then once people start putting the plan into action, obviously we make plans, but plans don't work out as we expect to. So we want quick feedback cycles in there. So as people take action, and this is the kind of the evidence piece really of the model that I described. If we can get that feedback quickly, then again we can start picking up and adjusting plans accordingly to try and meet the outcomes that we're looking for. So it's really feedback cycles. So for back briefing, I like to use A3s. So, the lean literature talks a lot about A3s, just that the A3 is the size of a piece of paper. Single piece of paper, if we can condense and communicate what we're doing and why we're doing it onto a single piece of paper, one, it's easy to communicate. It's really easy to update as we learn. And it probably means we understand the problem really well. Usually when you get thick documents, people have just been very verbose because they don't really understand the problem. If you understand something, you should be able to describe it really concisely on a single piece of paper.
Great.
So so A3 thinking is a really powerful tool as well. And the X matrix as an A3 is kind of the one I like to use to kind of get the ball rolling.
In other words, they help us see everything at once and put it in succinct format, right?
Yeah.
And I guess there is also even alignment already there built in. So there is a little opportunity to have those small misinformation elements that we've mentioned. So all of those you immediately think about what it would mean in different levels, right? You'd break it down to some extent, very similar to this taste model that we talked about.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. As we break things down, we get that feedback. The feedback kind of flows back, and we can start adjusting. So all of this is hypothesis. So even when we're stating aspirations, that's a hypothesis of what we think is maybe achievable. Our strategy is a hypothesis around the approach we should take. The evidence is a hypothesis about the right things we think to look for and measure, and that we think we should be seeing and hearing. The tactics are the hypothesis. So they're all different levels of granularity, and they all fit together. So if you think of your X matrix as the big hypothesis, that's going to have a slow feedback cycle. Potentially a year before you figure out whether the X matrix was right. So you start taking each tactic and breaking that down to smaller things till you get some fine-grained experiments. So you end up with this kind of nested fractal experimentation cycle where the small experiments feed back up to the bigger experiments, and maybe at the back briefing, the operational level. And then that feeds back up to the top level strategy cycle. So we can start adjusting strategy if we decide that the strategy we've chosen is the wrong one. We don't want to wait the whole year to discover that actually we picked the wrong strategy. And actually, we had this. So I started doing this with Rally Software when I was working for them, and we did have a year where we got to the end of the first quarter, and we just had to reset because we decided that one of the strategies we'd chosen was the wrong one. So we adjusted the strategy, and I think from future years we started trying to test the strategy a little bit earlier in the year so that we didn't get too far into the next year before we discovered we made a mistake.
And what would signal usually about the mistake? Would it be business outcomes, or is there any kind of other early prevention or early alarm system?
Yeah, it's business outcomes. It's to do with the evidence. So it might be that you're looking to get some traction in a new market, or go after certain new types of customers, or go after a new type of product maybe, or a new technology, and some of that early feedback that you're looking for, that evidence you're looking for, tells you that it's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So we thought we could go into. So I can't remember exactly what the strategy was for Rally, but let's take an example that we decide we're going to go into the Asian market as a strategy. That's where we're going to go and play. And we get into the first quarter, and we haven't got even a single new customer in Asia, or we've not been able to open an office there, or we've not been able to employ anybody there, and we might just decide this isn't going to work. And you've got to make a decision, and it's a judgment call usually. Do we keep on plowing on with this strategy? Do we just give it a little bit more, or do we just admit that actually we probably made the wrong choice here? We can probably spend our time going in a different direction. And that requires people to be prepared to face up to the fact that they made a bad decision. So we a lot of organizations, the leadership team, they're in the leadership team, they're the managers because they have the knowledge, they make good decisions, and they're not allowed to make mistakes. But actually, hey, everybody, we all make mistakes, we all make poor decisions. What we want to do is be able to pick up on those poor decisions early, learn from them, and move on. So I've been talking about recently about, failure is not an option, actually, because failure is a necessity. We actually have to fail. Another kind of book recommendation is a book by Matthew Syed called Black Box Thinking. So he one of the metaphor behind the book is the black box that airlines use, the aviation industries use, because as soon as there's a mistake, as soon as a plane crashes, they don't try and hide that. They don't try and sweep it under the carpet and say, "Oh, well, flying's complicated." These things happen. They're poring over the data. They're trying to figure out what happened, and many of the advantages, not just technically, but advances in procedural and the way the crew kind of communicate and interact in the cockpit have come from learning from earlier mistakes. And actually, that's why the aviation industry is actually really safe. That's why it's so safe to fly, because they're really good at learning.
Yeah, it is really a big part, I guess, about continuous improvement and learning, because it's not just one big project, as you said. It's not just you will do it once and it will be great. And interesting that you made a parallel with aviation, because it's often used as an example for how strategy should work sometimes, or always. Because if a plane takes a route or course with just a 5-degree mistake or error, if they keep going that direction for 10 minutes, that 5-degree difference will make hundreds of miles of difference. And if nobody notices for long enough, you might get into a situation where you have no fuel to make it right anymore.
Yeah.
So it's continuous improvement and learning. It seems like this is just inseparable with healthy strategy.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's all about. I talk about learning organizations. Organizations that are good at learning, and organizations that are not good at learning just put plans together, implement those plans, and then when the plans fail, when they're not successful, then they try and figure out who to blame. And somebody gets fired, and then we start the process again. We make more plans. The plans fail, we find out who to blame. Whereas what we want to be doing is figuring out how do we solve problems. Let's recognize the fact that we don't have all the information, we don't have all the knowledge. Nobody does. But if we work together and we learn how to solve our problems, then as the problems change and as we discover new problems, we can just continue solving them. So for me, what I see my job as a consultant is not just teaching people solutions, it's teaching people how to solve problems. If I just teach people a solution to today's problem, then they'll be okay for today and the next few days. But as soon as the problem changes, they're back where they started. So I've not really helped them. If I can teach people how to solve problems and how to be critical thinking and learning and all these kind of good things, recognizing feedback, then it's going to be much more sustainable. They're self-sufficient. So, teaching people to fish rather than teaching people how to fish rather than just giving them a fish.
Yeah. I guess it's the only scalable way to learn anything.
Yes. Yeah. It takes a long time. It's a lot harder. But long term, it's an investment that's worth making.
As we're getting closer to the end of this interview, I just wanted to ask, what would be maybe the top advice that you would give organizations that are starting to think more systematically about strategy? How not to get sidetracked and distracted, because everyone, especially people, think, okay, now I will let some more people have a say in the strategy, and then I'll get so much information that it's just, you cannot please anyone and you shouldn't. So how to stay on track when trying to build a healthy, strong, good strategy?
So I think the first thing is understanding what good strategy is, and I'd go back to Rummel's book on good strategy, bad strategy, because that's exactly what he's talking about. A good strategy is about making choices and making decisions. You can't please everybody all the time, and actually that's what a lot of organizations do. They'll say yes to everything, but actually strategy should enable you to decide not to do things. You should be saying no. If from your strategy you can't identify anything that you would say no to, it's probably not a good strategy. So the other kind of nice definition of strategy that I like is that strategy is it's a pattern in decisions that have been made. So you should be able to look at a set of decisions and made, spot the pattern in that, and infer the strategy from that pattern of decisions. And those decisions about, we'll do that because it meets our strategy, but we're not going to do that because it doesn't. So just thinking about what is our strategy, and having a small number of strategies. So the other thing I see is organizations have about 10 strategies, and all you're doing is creating a set of 10 buckets within which you can justify any piece of work. So small, in the same way, we talk about prioritizing and selecting what work we should do. Let's be clear on what is our strategy, where are we going to play, and where are we not going to play, and what are we not going to do. But once you've got that, and make sure everybody understands it, then the next thing is looking at outcomes, the evidence. So actually, the tactical thing, with the thing that most people jump in first with, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it, should be the last thing. That's the last decision we should make. So really, what's our strategy and what are the evidence? Those are the two things that I would recommend looking at first. And then people can make decisions on what they do based on, does this align to the strategy? And is this going to help move the needle on any of these pieces of evidence? And the X matrix, is just a really good way of visualizing that. But it can be quite complex. So just the simplest way of doing it, I think, is OKRs, objectives and key results. Mm-hmm. You can kind of think about strategies in terms of maybe strategic objectives. So what are the two big things that we want to achieve? What are the key results that will provide evidence that we're meeting those objectives? You can do that at the organizational level. You can do that down at the team level. You can do that down at the individual level. Make all those things transparent so that we can pick up any lack of alignment and allow people to figure out what they do. People should be able to decide how they achieve those results and how they meet those objectives. So OKRs is possibly the simplest way of getting started.
And for the end, I'd like to ask, is there some kind of secret to success? People always want to have a shortcut. Is there something that puts successful teams and successful companies who have achieved some clear understanding of how and what they want to do? Is there something that makes them different from the rest of the companies?
I think I'd go back to that attitude to failure, allowing people to make mistakes, making it safe to make mistakes, and a kind of healthy focus on learning from those mistakes. Clearly, you don't want to be making, we're not talking about celebrating failure. So it's not, let's make mistakes all the time. So in information theory suggests that, you get most information and most learning when you fail around about 50% of the time. So because you predict something and you don't get, the prediction doesn't happen, and you learn something, that's information. Hopefully you use that information, and the next time you'll now be successful, and then you'll try something else and you'll not be successful. So that's kind of, it's never going to be literally, succeed, fail. But, broadly speaking, to get the most information, you should be failing or not meeting your predictions 50% of the time. So and that scares a lot of people. That sounds like a lot of failure. But the organizations that don't see that as a bad thing, so they see that as something to be kind of talk about, if your failure should be a friend and not a foe, So it's a healthy thing. And you look at a lot of successful organizations out there, and what you see is the successful end product. What you don't see is all this failure that's gone on beforehand. So in black box thinking, the example that's thinking to mind at the moment is James Dyson and his vacuum cleaner. He spent a lot of time producing lots of different variations of that, none of which worked, until he eventually he invented the one that's been hugely successful now.
Right.
So if you try and avoid failure, you won't be successful. It's a paradox. In order to be successful, you have to fail.
It might be one of the most counterintuitive things.
It is, yes. Yeah.
The second to that would be only limiting your work in progress.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Stop starting and start finishing.
Yeah. But then, it's so true. People only concentrate on the successful outcome of someone else, and they have no idea how many failures went into that. Even light bulbs.
Yes. Yeah. I'm going to say there's the famous Edison quote, isn't there? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Did he make something like 10,000 of them?
It's something like that. I forget the exact quote, and I don't know whether it's how true it is. It's it's probably a number that's been plucked out of the air for dramatic effect. But yes, absolutely. Lots of failure went into that one success.
Yeah, and that's a pity that today we're so failure averse, because we literally now rest on top of someone else's failures and one success.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. It's been a really interesting and powerful conversation about strategy and approach to strategy.
Right, thank you. I enjoyed it.
It's a pleasure to have you. And I think there is so much in it that it would be interesting to dive into some of these aspects maybe once again.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to do that. Thank you. Yeah.
If you're watching us on YouTube, leave us a like. Thanks for joining us and see you here next time.